All right, this question comes from the Sunday night discussion about the nature of sin and the fallen nature of humanity in Romans 3:23. Romans 3:23 is one of the most familiar verses in the Bible. It's part of the series of verses in the book of Romans that was sometimes referred to as the Roman Road. And we use it oftentimes in evangelism to share the gospel with someone who's not a believer, where we'll work through these various verses: Romans 3:23, Romans 5:8, 6:23, Romans 10:9 and 10, Romans 10:13. These series of verses communicate in succession kind of a summary of the entire gospel of Jesus Christ and the Christian message of salvation. But the first verse in that is often used is Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. This verse is on its surface a very simple statement. It doesn't have a lot of words to it. It's a very short statement. It affirms the primary doctrine of Christianity, which says all people are sinners, sometimes known as the depravity of man or the universality of human sin. But what's built into the verse is a profound end to it, of that verse, which causes us to think in a much deeper level than just simple overarching theological statement. For all of sin, that would, if the verse stopped there, that would be one thing. But it adds to it, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The word sin comes from the from archery, or from throwing a spear or something like that, where the person who's shooting the bow and arrow or throwing the spear is aiming at a target. And the word sin is to miss that target. So if an archer is firing at a target, they fire at the target and they miss, we'd say they sinned. But in particular, this verse expands on that idea of it saying all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So you can imagine the archer aiming for a target and shooting it, and the arrow doesn't ever get to even the base of the target. Like, it falls short of achieving the target. And as you read through the book of Romans, what you would have expected Paul to say right there is all have sinned and fall short of the law of God. Because he'd already talked about how the law condemned all people because all people have broken the law. The law tells us we shouldn't covet. The law tells us, all these various things. And we fall short of that. And so what I would have expected Paul to say there is, for all have sinned and fall short of the law of God. But when he shifts from the law of God to the glory of God, what Paul does is essentially do a few things. Number one is he equates the law of God as an extension of the character of God. The glory of God describes God's essential character, the essence of who God is. And so when he says that all have sinned and fall short of the law of God, that would be one thing. We say, well, here's God's standard for behavior. But since God's standard of behavior is intricately linked to his attributes, his character, his nature, we now see that to fall short of the law of God is actually to fall short of God's character itself. The law is not disconnected from God like some impersonal written word somewhere, but the law functions as an extension of the character of God. What is God like? What is his attributes like? What is the essence of his being? So before people sinned, before Adam and Eve sinned, we would say that they were living their lives consistent with the attributes of God, his character, his nature. So that Adam and Eve in the garden prior to the fall, they were doing the things that they were made to do. Therefore, they were achieving the glory of God. God had imparted upon them certain standards of morality and spirituality and relationship with each other and with him, and all of those things were being perfectly fulfilled. Therefore, everything they did was achieving the glory of God. They were manifesting God's glory or his essential attributes by living out the life that he had given them. When Adam and Eve sinned, they fell from grace. We use that term. They fell from this relationship with God. When they sinned, they had a target for achieve these things according to God's essential character, which is manifested in the law. In the case of Adam and Eve, the law was a very simple statement of law. Don't eat of the tree, the sin of the garden. But when they sinned, what happened was they fell from that, and now with their life, now they're making decisions that they don't completely fulfill God's standard for them. Therefore, they fall short of the essential plan God has for them, and therefore fall short of God's essential character in his essential being. And so the glory of God is connected to the essence of who God is. Sin is doing anything that violates God's essential character and his plan for those creatures he has made. So since we've been made by God for a certain purpose, when we fail to live that out, this is called sin or falling short of God's standard for us. And so the whole notion of Romans 3:23, it's really a perplexing verse. It's profound, it's deep, it will cause you to contemplate it for days and days. I preached a series of sermons on that one verse, and it took 3 or 4 sermons just to go through this one verse. What we find in that verse is the profound notion that all people are sinners. They all fall short of some standard that we're called to achieve. The standard is expressed primarily through the law. Don't covet, don't murder, don't commit adultery, all these kinds of things. But the standard of those laws are really coextensive of the attribute of who God is and his essential character. So to commit murder, for instance, is to violate the character of the God who gave us the law. Do not murder one another. To covet something is to violate this standard that the God who gave us do not covet is built into his essential character. And so Romans 3:23 really is not just a statement of the universality of human sin and the depravity of man, but also a reminder that the law of God is coextensive to his attributes and his essential character. All right, so that's my answer to that question. Really good question.